Part of the genius and also the curse of human existence is that we are nothing if not constant optimizers. Teach Homo erectus how to sharpen a stick, and eventually his descendants will build nuclear warheads. Short of those weapons being used, though, there is no stopping of human progress. This often happens by way of slow, incremental advancement. But humans are impatient, and anytime a problem or obstacle crops up, we seem to look for a silver bullet, a means to conquer everything in one fell swoop. Of course, the same is true in crypto. We're always trying to optimize everything. And in Cardano, this especially applies to decentralization of block validation. People become very passionate about this topic, and they always seem to be reaching for that elusive silver bullet. But blockchain staking ecosystems are complex, and it's not clear that any silver bullet actually exists. Ready? Let's go. Today, we're going to have the big discussion about staking parameters. We're going to talk about the recent AMA from Charles, where he got one particular question about staking parameters. We'll talk about a few threads regarding these parameters. And most importantly, we'll discuss whether or not there is any silver bullet out there that can solve decentralization in Cardano stake pools once and for all. If your first question when you see this image is, why does the werewolf seem to have a small stud tongue ring? I don't know. Maybe that's a requirement when you're a young male werewolf on the dating scene. Or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. We are going to discuss this very big topic of decentralization in block validation in Cardano. And we're going to do so by way of looking at the recent AMA from Charles, where this exact question came up. But he also talked about some other things. So we're going to cover those topics first, and then we'll jump into the decentralization of validation topic. So he mentioned tiered fees, or he was asked about tiered fees, which is another really big discussion in Cardano. And I think every Gen 3 blockchain. Should you have a fee market? Should you have tiered fees? Should you not have a fee market? I personally have pretty strong thoughts on this topic. But Charles was asked about tiered fees. And he said tiered fees will probably come by way of two different SIPs. One will be bundled with the Laos SIPs. One will be a standalone SIP for the Genesis era. So we'll get two different SIPs that will do what's necessary to get tiered fees into place. But note that if we're post Voltaire, those will be SIPs that we all get to vote on. So if you don't like tiered fees, if you want something else, then if as long as these SIPs happen, if these SIPs happen after Voltaire is in place, the SIP 1694, then we'll all get to vote on it. He said they also need to get rid of min fee and also institute Babel fees. I'm pretty excited for Babel fees. So I think it's going to be very interesting. I think there'll be a lot of discussion around the tiered fee topic from some members of the ecosystem who've been very passionate about it in the past. On the topic of Lace, he said that Lace will still probably happen in Q1. On the topic of Algorand, he said they're still looking forward to the possibility of working with Algorand because John Wood is over at Algorand. John Woods, because John Woods is still over at Algorand and he was formerly with Cardano. There's always that bridge. So Charles, he seems to love the Algorand team and what they're doing. And so he's still looking forward to the possibility of working with Algorand. He was asked about his lobbying efforts in Washington, and he confirmed that all of Charles's lobbying efforts was kind of put on hold by the FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, Alameda debacle. Charles indicated, from his perspective at least, FTX has pretty much impacted everything and how Washington is looking at crypto. And it sounds like, pretty serious setback as far as the policy and lobbying efforts of crypto in general, I think. But these are the kind of things that happen in a bear market. I mean, things always sort of get worse. The public perception of crypto, PR and crypto always gets worse in a bear market. This time it's especially bad because we have this gigantic alleged criminal enterprise, humongous, probably fraudulent enterprise that's been uncovered. And of course, happened to coincide with the bear market. So this time, everything is kind of amplified by FTX. He was asked, how much will input endorsers increase the hardware requirements of stake pools? He says they're doing a lot of modeling on this and they should know by May. In kind of a bolder position, Charles says he thinks cash will be banned and CBDCs will be tied to social credit scores. So, of course, he's indicating that everybody should resist the introduction of CBDCs. This is a little bit different perspective than some people have. Some people think that CBDCs might be introduced and they might only be used for sort of interbank trading, international trading between central banks, these kinds of things, that the central bank doesn't have any desire to actually get involved in the retail end of what CBDCs could be. But who knows? I mean, I have a feeling CBDCs are definitely coming. So we're definitely going to get to find out how much various central banks in the world really want a part of any kind of retail CBDC, or if they're really just aimed at sort of like the institutional interbank stuff. We know for sure that some banks, like the Central Bank of China, very much interested in doing exactly this, having a retail CBDC that is very much tied to a social credit system. And of course, in the West, we all look at this as a very dystopian development. Here's the question that brings us to this topic of decentralization in Cardano stake pools. The stake pools in Cardano are in charge of block production, block validation, and as long as we've had stake pools, we've had people looking to IOG with certain demands, demanding that K be changed, that A naught be changed, that the min pool fee be deleted. People have always looked to IOG because out of the three founding entities, it was IOG who was in charge of the vast, vast, vast majority of the technical work to be done. But when Charles got this question in this AMA, he had an interesting answer. He said, hey, we're now in the era of Voltaire. SIP 1694 or something like it is going to be passed. And we'll be in an era where when you want these kinds of changes to the blockchain, you're going to need to convince the ecosystem. You're going to need to propose a SIP and get people to vote in favor of it. This is no longer a matter of just being a squeaky wheel to try to get IOG to consider whatever it is you want to get done. You're going to have to propose these types of changes and then convince the entire ecosystem to vote in favor of it. So what do all these parameters actually mean? We've talked about all of them before multiple times in the past on this channel, but luckily there was a thread from Cardano Spot just yesterday detailing each of these parameters. So to start off, we have the min pool fee. This is the fixed 340 ADA fee that is directed to SPOs from delegated rewards for every epoch with at least one block. So the stake pools don't have a choice. The stake pool operator is going to get 340 ADA from every single epoch where a block was validated, regardless of whether the SPO wants it or not. Min pool fee has been added as an extra layer of protection from Sybil attacks. And Cardano Spot rightly points out it's hotly debated whether to be removed so that smaller pools can have better return on ADA. So you probably already know how this works. For a very small pool, this is a big curve to get over because if they don't mine very many blocks in a particular epoch, then a very large percentage of the rewards will be going to the SPO because they get automatically 340 ADA as a minimum fee for every block where every block that they validate. So it's going to look like those very small SPOs are taking way too much of the reward for the blocks they mine because they can't change this 340 min pool fee. The next parameter is A naught. This is the pledge influence factor, which Cardano Spot tells us is set at 0.3. So this means that pools with a higher amount of pledge get better rewards. Cardano Spot describes it as a yield booster. If you set it higher, pledge is more important, and a higher pledge gives much better rewards. At lower values, the pledge is less relevant. So right now it's set only at 0.3. K determines saturation point for pools. Currently, K equals 500. K helps determine the max stake in a pool that receives rewards, creating a soft cap on pool size. We can now have 500 fully saturated pools with 35 billion ADA, or approximately 70 million each. So you probably know how this works as well. We've got this sort of soft cap on the amount of delegation that can come into a pool, and it depends on how much ADA is outstanding. So the amount of ADA outstanding that's out here circulating, on the open markets is increasing with every single block that gets validated. Every single epoch, there are rewards given out in ADA, and that increases the amount of ADA outstanding, which means that this soft cap is constantly going up incrementally, tiny bit by tiny bit. It's currently around 70 million. So if a stake pool's delegation goes beyond that 70 million number, then the reward per ADA for the delegators doesn't increase, but the amount of ADA from delegators has increased. So the rewards get worse if you go beyond the saturation point. Two additional bits of jargon you hear people using are MAV, or minimum attack vector, and Nakamoto coefficient. So currently the MAV of Cardano is something like 22. And this is the minimum number of entities that can collude to attack the network. So in order to do that, they need to control 51% of the stake. So obviously, the higher the MAV, the more entities that would be required to collude to control 51% of the stake in the ecosystem, the more secure the system. Also, yesterday, there was this great thread from Adam Dean explaining how the minpool fee came to be and how it works as an anti-Sybil attack mechanism. He says, during the ITN, that's the incentivized test net, there was a completely free market economy where minpool fee and operator margin could both be set to 0. So you didn't have to have this minpool fee of 340. You could actually just set that to 0. But during the ITN, the concern was raised regarding the Sybil attack vector, that a well-funded actor who had other income sources could afford to run multiple pools at 0 cost to the delegators to attract all their stake. Since entrenched delegators tend to stick around, this could present a problem either via that bad actor flipping the switch and charging an enormously high rate, sort of a bait and switch against the delegators, or driving the rest of the honest stake pools out of business and then attack the network with something like 51%, or in collusion with other actors who had 51% who are maybe doing the same thing. So basically saying that if you don't have this 340 min fee, then it's really easy for somebody who can afford to run a bunch of stake pools to just run a bunch of stake pools, charge the delegators nothing, basically have zero fee, true zero fee pools, get a whole bunch of stake, and then rack up all this delegation, rack up a huge portion of the network, causing all this centralization and, really hurting the MAV and, possibly even getting close to that 51%, maybe in collusion with a few others, but getting close to the 51% and attacking the network. He says, so the minimum pool cost that is actually in the IOG research, this is a point of contention with some people. So the minimum pool cost, which is operators actually charging what it actually costs to run their stake pool, was floated as a solution to arrive at 340 ADA. IOG just polled the existing SPO stake pool operator community and arrived at rough average costs of, I believe, 210 USD per month at the time. So at current ADA prices, 340 ADA made sense because IOG just polled the stake pools and said, hey, how much does it actually cost to run your stake pools? We should have a minimum fee that requires stake pools to charge what it actually costs to run a stake pool, so that nobody can run their stake pool at a loss and just collect all the delegation in the ecosystem and create these problems for decentralization. So the min stake pool fee was initially put in place to prevent centralization of the staking system. So, what is the current controversy all about? Well, like I said, humans are all about optimizing. And in Cardano, we're constantly trying to optimize our decentralization. We're more decentralized than Bitcoin. We're more decentralized than Ethereum, but that's not enough. This is Cardano. We're constantly trying to be more decentralized. That means we're trying to make that MAV number, that minimum attack vector, go up. Here's that MAV. It's these multi-pool operators right here. If they all got together and colluded, all of these entities together, this expanded part of this donut, they could control 51% of the network. So we want this number to go up. We want this to include a greater number of entities. And one way people suggest doing that is by dropping the min pool fee, that 340 ADA per epoch. They believe by getting rid of that part, that difficult part of the curve for small pools, then more small pools will be able to become self-sustaining. Of course, the problem with that is, and maybe it's not a problem, I'm not saying it would be good or bad to get rid of the min pool fee, but just as was pointed out in that last thread, the reason the min pool fee is there is to prevent a big multi-pool operator from emerging who would charge next to nothing to get a gigantic amount of stake and then suddenly start charging much, much more without the, without the delegators necessarily noticing, or they could get all that stake to try to approach that 51% figure. And what seems to be true is that in all things in sort of commercial economic life, the people who can charge the least for something and outlast their competition are the people who have the most capital. So I'm not sure if we introduce a system where there was no min fee, it seems like the parties who could exploit that the most would be the parties who are willing to get paid nothing or next to nothing for, a year, 18 months, 2 years even, and garner some huge amount of the delegation because they're charging almost nothing and they could be operating at a loss. I'm not so sure that small stake pools could compete against that either, because what we've seen with delegation is that delegation goes where it gets the greatest return. And if a stake pool were willing to charge nothing because they had a lot of capital, they could operate at a loss for a long time, they could probably garner a huge amount of the delegation. We've seen this already with stake pool multi-operators like 1PCT here. Right after the ITN, 1PCT managed to garner a large amount of delegation. What does it say here? How many stake pools does it say 1PCT has 29 stake pools, if I'm reading this correctly. And they had a lot of stake pools kind of right off the bat because they were only charging 1%. So what we know is that multi-stake pool operators, they are willing to charge less if they can garner a large amount of delegation. So what I'm saying is that it's not totally clear. It's not clear what actually happens. I mean, maybe dropping the min pool fee turns out to be great. Maybe we drop the min pool fee and a lot more of these solo stake pool operators are able to thrive. But maybe we drop the min pool fee and all of a sudden we see a new class of multi-stake pool operators who are willing to operate at a loss for a long time, much longer than any solo pool operator would be willing to operate for. And that results in more centralization. I think it's unclear. And I think the people who, I think it's good that people are trying to model this out and come up with predictions. But this whole Cardano stake pool thing is pretty new. It's pretty new. And I think it's hard to predict. It's hard to predict which way this goes. It's not clear to me that dropping the min pool fee is a silver bullet. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be good or bad. I'm just saying it's unclear to me whether or not that's any kind of silver bullet. The next silver bullet that people seem to always reach for is changing K. This would be to change that soft cap on delegation to a single stake pool. We talked about it currently being set at around 70 million because of the amount of ADA currently outstanding. So if we cut that in half, if we went down to a soft cap of 35 million, 40 million, something in that neighborhood, you can tell that's obviously also not a silver bullet, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to get these entities in the MAV, we're trying to get them to control less of the delegation so that the MAV number goes up, so the decentralization goes up. So if you use K to cut the cap in half or cut it by any amount, these stake pools are just going to increase the number of stake pools they're running. If Binance is running 62 and you cut the cap in half, they might just double the number of stake pools they're running. So changing K alone may not create much progress towards greater decentralization. So what people usually come to is they say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to change K, but at the same time, we're going to change A naught. We're going to make pledge more important, because then people who run multiple stake pools, they're going to have to put more of their own capital into the pledge for each stake pool. We're going to make it more expensive for them to run multiple stake pools. Here's why I also don't think increasing the pledge factor, A naught, here's why I also don't think that's a silver bullet. So if you look at the parties in the MAV, the entities in the MAV, I mean, we want them to have fewer stake pools so the MAV goes up. But look at the identity of these parties. It's Binance. Number 2 is Avengers. Avengers is speculated to be Coinbase. Next is Wave. So what do we know about these top two? Who has more Cardano than Binance? Is there more oxygen in CZ's office, or does he have more Cardano? I don't know. Obviously, it's oxygen, but more molecules of oxygen in his office. But number 2 is probably ADA. He probably has more ADA than almost anything else. Dude's got a lot of ADA. Okay, he's got more of a lot of other assets, I'm sure, but he has a lot of ADA, almost more ADA probably than anybody else. Coinbase, what do they have a lot of? ADA. It would probably be trivial for CZ to park a bunch of ADA. He's already got the ADA on deposit. A lot of people have deposited ADA in Binance. He could easily park a bunch of ADA in pledge to solve whatever pledge parameter increase, A naught parameter increase we come up with. Same thing with Coinbase. They have ADA. They can easily park ADA in pledge to solve this problem. And you could say, okay, well, we'll just increase A naught to a point where they have to reduce the number of their pools. Okay, great. But what about these solo stake pool operators we're trying to encourage? If you increase the influence of pledge, if you make pledge more important for the success of a stake pool, you're affecting the permissionlessness. I mean, the practical permissionlessness of our system of staking. Because if it requires a ton of pledge to be an effective stake pool, you're basically saying that nobody without a lot of money can become a stake pool in Cardano. They can't have an effective stake pool in Cardano unless they have a lot of money. And if it's as a practical matter, if people without a lot of capital can't engage in the activities of a stake pool, then you're probably going to have fewer solo stake pools thriving. I mean, does anybody really want to be in an ecosystem where only the rich can effectively run a stake pool? That's not going to make for good headlines. And when I look at the names in the MAV, all of these multi-pool operators seem like they have a lot of ADA. They all seem like they have way more ADA than all of the parties outside of the MAV, especially the solo stake pool operators. And it seems like they would be the ones who would most be able to maximize the importance of A naught increasing. So I don't think there are any clear silver bullets out there that are going to solve decentralization and Cardano staking forever. I think definitely there is probably some fine tuning we can do. We're probably not in an optimal state at this time. I'm sure there's some fine tuning we can do, because I feel like these parameters, I don't think any combination of parameters is a silver bullet. I think what we have here is trade-offs, kind of akin to the blockchain trilemma. You have to make trade-offs when you adjust these things. And I'm sure there's some amount of modeling that can be done by technicians to figure out, some better fine tuning that will increase decentralization. But I don't think it's this really clear cut case where there's an obvious silver bullet. And whatever that fine tuning is that can increase decentralization with our stake pools, I think it does need to go through the Voltaire process. Whoever can come up with the best fine tuning needs to create a SIP, put it before the entire ecosystem and convince the entire ecosystem that those are the right adjustments we need to make. I hope you're having a great week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.